Dan, so someone that's really done it all in the recording industry from a career perspective,
Right.
What would you tell your 15-year-old self that was walking into that first session that you're surprised now to know is such an important principle of building and maintaining a career as a studio musician?
I'm talking to myself, right? I like this. You did the right things. You were curious. You practiced relentlessly. You know, I back when I was a kid, between 13, 15, 16 years old, playing 8 hours, 10 hours a day was not unheard of. I mean, I was eaten up by it. The preparation, the curiosity in a multitude of different styles and music, all, check those off. You have to be a studio guitarist, studio musician in general, you have to be acquainted. You have to be an expert in everything, but you need to be acquainted with as much as possible because you never know what you're going to be hired to do. You can't pass go on this. You have to have experience. Basically, what you're going to learn is you're going to learn to be malleable, and you're going to learn to have an ego, but also dispose of it at any given moment, because what you understand is that it's a transaction. Somebody's paying you money. Or at the beginning, it was for free, but they're giving you an opportunity. But when they start paying you, the job is then you're in the service business. It's not about you as a musician. You can have all of the opinions, judgments when you're doing your own music, but when you're a studio musician, you relinquish some of that. You're making judgments, but the minute that what you offer up is rejected, dismissed, or just acknowledged, but like, what else we got? You cannot hang on to any of that with an ego. Like, no, this is it. Damn it, this is the best part. If the person that's paying you doesn't hear it that way, it's not the best part for that moment. That's the hardest thing. And I've seen in my career, I've seen a lot of people miss that. I didn't miss that, but I was stubborn as hell. And my wife of all these years used to come in when we were teenagers. Every once in a while would be curious and watch me do a session. And she would articulate after the session to me, she loved it. She's not a musician, which is probably why we're still married. But she said, Dan, why don't you let people, like when they like something, why don't you just let go of it? You always say, let's do it one more time. Because I had that ego, that is very, very thing that enabled me to step into larger situations than I was probably ready for was also a detriment to some degree. Now, it didn't ruin my career, so I guess I'd have to take that into account. But I would sit my young self down and say, you need to take a step back here. The preparation, I had a curiosity for wanting everything and all things recording studio. To me, most guitar players grow up wanting to be rock stars. I didn't have any inkling of that. That didn't sound good to me. Sitting in a studio, drinking coffee, being with some of the best musicians in the world, making new music, that was like the new frontier. And luckily for me, I also had an in the sense that my dad was a professional musician. He was an arranger, orchestrator. I got to go and watch the greats in my pursuit. I got to see people like Reggie Young, Steve Gibson when I was young, Dale Sellers, Pete Wade, all of royalty in Nashville. That's really the best education. It's not, nothing against the colleges that specialize in all this stuff, but as studio owner, engineer, everything, you're when people say, can I come and watch? You usually say, yeah, but just, be a fly on the wall. There's no educational system that can, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like when you go from college football to the pro football, they say it's the speed. You cannot articulate that because everybody is the best.
Right.
So I would say that would be the same thing. You play in pickup bands when you're a kid, or even if you're doing demos. Okay, that's one thing. But when you see the people that are actually in there making the records, that can't be simulated in a classroom. You can talk about it hypothetically, but there are so many variables that happen in a room at one time. When I was young, I was probably 21 when Sherry and I moved to Los Angeles, and I had an opportunity to get in the session scene out there. And I didn't realize this, but that was a master class for me. They were paying me. It was like a college scholarship to learn how to produce. I didn't even have that question. I had no interest in becoming a producer. I had an interest in playing for all those producers. Mm-hmm. But it was a game time experience. Everything right. that I went through as a player, by that point I knew how to get myself along. I mean, there's always experience, and we can talk about some of the you learn from the successes, but you really learn from when you get your ass handed to you, from the failures. Okay. But I was learning my future career as a record producer, and without knowing it.
So when you were in those early sessions, your dad was an arranger. Was he an orchestral arranger?
Yes. I mean, but he worked with rhythm sections sometimes. Right. And so, they would hire the cream of the crop here in Nashville. Yeah. And
so did you listen to a lot of your dad's work? Was there anything that you kind of took away from listening to orchestral arrangements and music that applied to creating pop music?
Not intentionally. I think it was because I was around it. My mother was also a wonderful classical pianist. So there's always music around, and it's a language, with many different dialects. I wasn't interested so much in the orchestral side of it, but that some of it had to permeate my musical sensibility, his sense of balance, arrangement, all those things. The way I love playing guitar and been asked mostly about is my phrasing. But a lot of that came because he was a really great string writer, and it's not all about symmetrical. That he would write over bars and clusters of 5s and 8s and 13s and stuff like that. Not that I could read that stuff, but it filtered its way into my consciousness. Mm-hmm. But I think it was just being around a professional musician, the way that he conducted himself in recording studios. All that was not lost on me, even though I wasn't, I didn't have the questions. I really didn't have any questions. I was just kind of a open book and a clean slate. Mm-hmm. And so I just watched. When things go well and everything clicks, well, there's not a whole lot to learn. But when you really get into the heavy learning is when something is not quite gelling. And then all of a sudden that awkwardness, that abject fear in a room of like, a lot of money's being spent and we may not get this. Well, what do you do then?
Right.
Being on the field, being on the basketball court, you're losing. How do you adjust halftime?
Right.
How do you make something work that is absolutely not working? Mm-hmm. Those were the lessons that I was picking up. Again, it wasn't like I had a checklist. I wasn't that intelligent, but by osmosis and just by being around, you kind of saw that in action. I was lucky enough, in my younger days, in my 20s, to get calls from people like, Quincy Jones, Arif Mardin, or Mutt Lange, down the list. Right. Richard Perry, and if you look at during that period who was making hits, I mean, then all of a sudden those were some of the biggest names.
Right.
And certainly I learned probably as much from the worst, the ones who panicked, berated people, were so insecure that they couldn't take the heat of the responsibility. It always had to be somebody else's problem.
Right.
Blame game,
Mm-hmm.
So all that. So I learned from that too. And then you contrast it with the way, my cliche line about somebody like Mutt Lange, who was, I always felt like, you could take an inanimate object like the ladder over there, and he could, in the end, he would make music with that ladder somehow. He would drag you across the finish line because he had this vast subset of knowledge, but he also had this will to pull you across the finish line. If as long as you would allow him to poke, prod, carry you, whatever, you were going to win with him.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way to do music.
Right.
Because then all of a sudden, I also noticed during those moments, well, I can breathe. I'm not clenching. I'm not trying to protect something. I'm open. I'm giving everything I got. And somebody like that's going, okay, maybe not that, but I love that.
Right.
Again, you're getting affirmed. You're getting an education from somebody. You're seeing how somebody processes, puts all this stuff together. It's a win-win. And that, to me, that seems like the best way to do it. It's not about patronizing people and blowing smoke. It's about finding what works.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, in this setting, what we're talking about right now, studio work, the measure of success outside of your perfection on your instrument, everybody else on, but the only measure ultimately. And we live in a commercial world, it's the world of commerce. So in the studio world, it is hits. You have to recognize that is the ultimate measure now. That's if you're participating in something that's successful, that's going to get you into the next room because people associate you with success, right?
Right.
Now, you can shelve that and go, okay, well, that's the commercial side. Well, that is the main measure, right? There are other subsets. If you are a great team player, people are going to want you to be around because they know it's not just about you. If you are a person, I mean, and ultimately session players are hired to make the music of the artist vis-a-vis through the producer. They got to walk out happy. Somebody's got to be happy.
Right.
Hopefully you're happy too,
There's certain things that are innately within us that we're musically talented. There's certain humans that have that side of their brain that just fires at a higher rate than others. But what I'm hearing you say is that the core of a lot of the incredible philosophies that you learned internally without even knowing that you were learning them came from learned instincts, which are happening through the observation of legends and experts, doing it. And you're really getting a masterclass from a master tradesman as an apprentice, really seeing it happen. It sounds like you had the incredible privilege to be able to do that, pretty young, and the fortune to be able to see that, like, that's what I want to do and zero in on it, 100%.
The other side is that you can be a great musician. I know a lot of great musicians who are not necessarily great studio musicians because the problem solving aspect, all of that is so crucial because things sometimes can move very quickly. Just because you're great at your instrument, you could be a great artist, doesn't mean that that's going to apply to all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. So you have to really understand that there are some great live players who are just horrible in the studio, and vice versa. A lot of studio players, I'd put myself in it. I would not have said I had to learn how to be a decent live player. But just because I was playing on some substantial records didn't mean I would get up on stage and carry that same thing. There are certain things in each of those disciplines that are unique unto themselves.
So in those early days in some of your first sessions, were there any like great lessons that you haven't forgot from things that you learned through?
Oh man, I could tell you this great story about this producer named Ronnie Hafkin. During my high school years, he had other big acts, but I can't remember what they were. But he had one that I knew they were hopping on all cylinders. There was a rock band called Dr. Hook, and so Ronnie was a very progressive producer. He was always looking for younger talent, and in Nashville, the way I played, there was a little tension between the established guard and the settle down young kid, that kind of thing. He was doing a record on an R&B artist named Lou Rawls, who was very famous at the time. I loved Lou Rawls' voice. We were doing a session, and I was the youngest by probably 15 years, if not 20 years. Super session of musicians in the studio. I mean, super session. The track wasn't gelling, and the worst thing that was conceivable happened to me. Now, I'll never forget. I mean, I can feel the emotions. Ronnie got on the talk back and said, "Hey Dan, why don't you sit one out? I want to try something different." So basically, I singled out. It's like, of all you guys, let's extract one. Well, humiliation, utter humiliation, and this was going from being called at this age, going in with that expectation, and then being absolutely crushed. I mean, like being close to tears. I mean, I was pretty emotional because it was, what do you do? Here's my big chance, and already I've lost. And I never forget, Ronnie came in when there was a break, and he said, "Hey Dan, the reason I took you out wasn't because it was your fault." He said, "I already know who was holding it back." He said, "If I called them out, that's a group of peers. It would have ruined the session because they'd stick up for their own. And I had to get the song cut." He said, "You can come in tomorrow and replace everything and do whatever you want." He said, "Because I love the way you play."
Wow.
So from here to here to here, within 40 minutes, he enabled. He then took the tapes back then, right, to the West Coast, and he was working with the cream of the crop in LA, and especially this one early 30-something arranger / producer, mega star keyboard player named Robbie Buchanan. And he heard me as he was doing overdubs, and he said, "Who's that guitar player?" And that was the seedling of me meeting Robbie Buchanan and him telling me a couple months later, "Hey, you should really come to Los Angeles. There's probably a spot for you out here."
Wow. So,
I mean, that was one day.
Yeah.
One day in the life yielded every bit of absolute failure to absolute winning, to connection to what was going to be my dream career in Los Angeles.
Right. There's this internal, this battle that's happening where, as you said, there's a level of commerce where the more successful the songs that you play on, the more work you're going to get. It's just a matter of the industry. There's an amount of skill on your instrument that is important, but there's also the hang and, in that aspect. And then there's all the things that we can't control. If the day doesn't go bad and you just happen to be in the room that day, and if you can do everything that you can to try to make yourself as valuable to the person that's hiring you as you can, but there's also a lot of things you can't control. And I just, have not been in this industry nearly as long as you, but long enough to see that there is a roller coaster ride that happens for everybody. And there's some people that seem to be able to just flow with it and ride the wave. Yes. And there's others that, but it affects all of us. Yeah. There was a thought when I was a kid coming into this that you work really hard, you climb the ladder, and you get to a point where you've made it. And then you're like, you're there, you're good,
Bulletproof.
And what I recognize is that you're only as good as the last record that was successful, or the last great session that went well with you in the room. And
how about the last track that you did on the session?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, every track, you get through one, right? Mm-hmm. And it's all, everybody's high-fiving each other. And then sometimes you get to the second song of the day, and by the end of working on that for 2 or 3 hours, everything is lost and obliterated. The high fives are replaced by like, what the hell's going on here?
Right.
So yes, within, and there's different iterations of that, but yeah, I think success, repetition give you that sense of, you've been around the proverbial track a few times. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it ever feels good. I think you just have to get used to that, the fact that you're going to deal with this pretty much every day of your life. And sometimes in that tension, if you let it sit long enough, you may even learn something. So I'm not the best guitar player, but I was dedicated. What I was fascinated with when I was young was why things sounded so good when they were recorded. Yeah. Like I just couldn't, why does that one bar, that one note on the guitar, why did that sound so good? Why did the way that guy played that rhythm, why was this one chorus, why did that attract me more than the second chorus, or vice versa? Mm-hmm. Everything is relationship. And I mean, relationship amongst people, players in the room. Some producer hires 2 guitarists. And I've experienced this too when I was young. Same things with some guitar players that were, way up the food chain from me, because I was just entering. And, some of them, they were very territorial about their position. And the treatment wasn't stellar, or that inviting. And you learn how to survive in that too, because you got to claim a little turf for yourself, but you also realize that if you start some kind of feud, if you make it about yourself, ultimately you're going to lose. I can't say enough how important it is to continually reorient yourself with what the mission statement, what you're there to do. You're there for one thing. You're there to make the music of the artist better. And if you're lucky enough, they have success, and then they call you again. And hopefully you repeat that one. And if you're lucky beyond that, one of their friends who's cutting a record in 3 months says, hey, you got any new musicians? You get that, and this thing starts kind of pollinating itself. That's what you want. And in every one of those situations, you could have had a high the day before. Everything you thought and did, you were a star, right?
Right.
You get to the next day in a different situation. Everything you think and do is the polar opposite. That's not where they're coming from. And that's the big difference. So it's not about being the best at what you do, but it's being able to sit over here and do something one day and realize this is where you're coming from. The next day, you got to be over here. Totally different set of values. Everybody can go into a studio, and if they're proficient, they can have a good day if the music is going the way that they hear it, they want to present it. But the greatest studio players, the ones I always looked up to, were able to also go into that B and C situations and come up against maybe the edge of what they were comfortable with or whatever, but then they just figure a way around it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the nutshell. It sounds really, well, it is really simple. It's not really that hard. The concept is it's like, for a kindergartner, right? The implementation is, that's where the variables go up.
So what ended up leading you to LA?
That session. I always wanted to go out there. And I had a dear friend who just moved from the coast. He was in a band that I absolutely loved because they were studio players, a band called Toto. And David Hungate was a bass player in the band. And he, of all things, David was a Texan. He had played sessions in LA for quite some time, and he was on everybody's hits. He wanted to raise his family in Nashville, which is unthinkable to me. It's like, why would you come here? And he wanted to play country music. You're in Toto. He wanted to do it. So, but anyway, so we were doing a session. We met, and he kind of took me under his wing, and he just said he knew that his bandmate Steve Lukather was a massive inspiration to me. And he said, really, at this time, and this was like 79 or 80, and he said, you really have to go to LA if you really want to ding the bell for a guitar player. That's the place. He wasn't saying that Nashville's great, but for what you do, I should be more specific, to do with the kind of guitar playing I was doing, which was more rock oriented. LA was hands down the place. And he was the guy who said, that's where you needed to go. So I think I had my sights set on it 19 or 20. I thought it was feasible because I didn't read music very well. And I thought that everybody had to read music great out there. They read chord charts, but, not notated fly shit, And jumping back to when Robbie Buchanan reached out to me, I intimated that to him. I said, Robbie, maybe I should woodshed for a year, at least get my reading, somewhat out of the elementary stage. And he said, no. He said, we want creativity. We want people who can play like you. That's it. I had a chance to go out to LA, and I went out there because of Robbie Buchanan. Hey, Dan, can you be out here 2 weeks on a Tuesday? I can get you on this session. I'm there. Back then, you could pay a porter at the airport to put all your road cases on the plane. It was not our reality now. Pedal boards, guitars, I would get all that on there, run to the rental car when I got to LAX, pick it up, hard to find the studio, set up my gear, play a session, maybe stay the night in a hotel if I was lucky. If not, I'd catch the red eye because maybe I had a demo the next day in Nashville, right? I never charged anybody for the cartage. Every time I went out there, I would end up losing money. I told my friend Robbie, and I also told, back then they had contractors who called, for the producers. I said, just book me like I live here. And he did. Hey, 2 days from now, I can be there. I'll be there. And I would do this ad nauseum and for a year. And I'm not suggesting that being naive is a smart thing, but the point was I was more interested in getting the call back, like making yourself, and this is my big preaching moment, invaluable to somebody. As far as I was concerned, you won the day if they said, hey, we got something going on in a couple of weeks, can you come back? Because that meant you moved the dial.
Right.
So however I had to move the dial, I cared more about that. I couldn't do that indefinitely. I'd be broken on the street. But that is a significant, I think a value that you have to make yourself invaluable to somebody before you start really getting into the commerce. Sometimes, if there is a red flag when I see younger people coming up through the system, and they tend to talk more about the financial aspect of something, if that gets out in front, usually that's a warning sign. It's not. The financial element is very important, but it's not the most important thing. And if you make people win, all that follows. You don't have to worry about it as much. Sometimes people take advantage of you, but if you invest in the relationship with them and they know that you are there for them, the sky's the limit on that. You have to be good enough to get in the game. It's not that either one of these things are more important than the other. They just have to coexist. Mm-hmm. Also, other little nugget that I learned this from my dad too. I had made a statement in my teenage years, just like a typical teenage boy who was full of himself, but also just on the hunt, I wanted to be the best I could be, but I just said, Dad, I want to be the best studio player in the world, as if that even exists. And he was kind about that, but he said, don't forget that when you get a gig, somebody else just lost a gig. you're inevitably going to run into a situation where somebody says, hey, we'd like you to play guitar on this record. Well, chances are that, whoever played on the previous record is not getting called back.
And in Nashville, a lot of times it's your buddy.
The main thing he was heading towards, and I took his point, was that you have a respect for that. I wasn't trying to. I was just trying to be the best I could be. There's a difference. Your intent, and people will call you out on that. If you're one of those kind of people that, trying to skirt around and take people's gigs, that does not end up well. It never ends well because people bust you on that ultimately, if you're not a team player. But I think the thing is, it's just that you realize this ecosystem is more than just a transaction. It's more than just how you play your instruments, more than being on hit records. All of that filters into it. But invariably what you're going to have is you're going to make a commitment to something. Dan, we'd like to book you in July. We're in April now. We'd like to book you in July for a week for this project. Well, I don't have anything going on in July, Yeah, I'm there. It's in the book. Great. We'll see you at such and such studio, this many sessions. You made a commitment. Let's say Ed Sheeran calls you up. I just heard you're playing, and I'd love to try you out on my record. That's not going to happen. Ed's going to play mostly. But you take my point, right? Uh-huh. Okay. I'd love to. God, I'm flattered. When is it? July, such and such a dates. And you're going, just me. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm booked on, what I do. There is no one answer for that. But, there is one answer that you have to be careful. Just saying yes. You could justify that. Well, getting on Ed Sheeran's record, whatever it costs me with this other person may be worth it. But you're going to, somebody else took the time to call you, book you that far in advance. And then you got a choice, and you have to figure out, what do I do? Sometimes the best thing to do is to tell Ed Sheeran that you can't do it and take your chances with that. Maybe Ed will say, well, what about the next week? That'll happen too. It has to be bigger, about more than just yourself. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that you still have to relate to people. And let's say you've taken the hypothetical, Ed Sheeran's, talk to your wife, you talk to your friend, whoever. No, you can't pass this up. It's too good. Then you're going to have to call that other producer, and you're going to have to throw yourself on your sword. And, maybe they'll understand, but you have to take the hit yourself. You have to say, this is on me. To the best of my understanding, this is what I need to do. And be prepared if somebody's going to call you out on it, and sometimes they do. You can fill in the blanks with the adjectives. Yeah. It's not a neat business. It's not like you got you show up 8 to 5 every day, at the same office. These are moving targets.
It's not a surface level decision when that sort of thing happens,
Not at all.
Someone might from the outside look in and say, okay, well this gig pays more and this person is maybe higher profile. Of course you're going to do that without any other consideration.
Right.
And so I love where you say that it's it's not just the takeaway is don't necessarily say yes right away. Consider the situation regardless of what it might look like on the surface. You got to think about it and understand and be prepared that sometimes that decision is not going to turn out the way that you thought it would. And there's nothing you can do to control that. You can just use your instincts the best you can.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a reputation of somebody who doesn't honor commitments, I mean, it's lethal.
Were there any mentors that you had, producers or players, that you have really memorable lessons from that you learned that have applied to your career? In
a broad sense, everybody was a mentor, when you start out. But I didn't have one single person who always had their arm around me. Sometimes you can have that. I just had people that were willing to vouch for me and say, yeah, this guy's good. You get him in a situation. You don't get that usually after one time. You have to repeat it several times. When people see that you're consistent, that's the currency right there. Mm-hmm. Word of mouth.
Were there any moments in the process of building that reputation that led to that word of mouth where you as a younger player were feeling a little impatient?
I was ready to meet the moment. Now, the moments were coming fast, and I think I was just young enough not to have a lot of fear. My memory of that is not that I was just this badass that couldn't be stopped. I mean, I did get asked a couple of times to go out on major tours, and I always turned them down because because what I felt like I had come into, I took more seriously, even if they were offering absurd amounts of money. I just felt that just because I had another opportunity that was attractive, give any room for the next guy in line to establish himself. Because once you leave, I mean, that's just fair game, That's I remember when I left Los Angeles in 1990 to move back to Nashville. Sherry and I had this idea we wanted to raise our family in Nashville. And circumstances were such that I was going to step out of playing studio music, and I was in a band that had some hits. So that was my time. My teenage time was when I was 30. And I remember a couple of my friends saying, "Oh, this town's going to miss you, man. It won't be the same without you." Because I'd played on so many records, And I remember even thinking at 30 years old, yeah, I bet you they're going to miss me for about, let's give it 18 hours. And then that thing is just, that hole's going to go, whoop, and sure as shoot, that's what happens, because it's next man up. Any given day, there's 20 people that are as good as you that can do what you do. Either you can be fearful because of that, or you can just acknowledge it. Get over your ego. It's like, if you're lucky enough to have found work, what you do is not, you can't be protectionist. You can't, if somebody's better than you and better at that certain thing, ultimately they're going to find out and you're going to be replaced. So you can't protect things. But what you can do is protect the idea of, you want to be available. You don't want to lose it because you're not available. I mean, I had a couple other situations where, I wasn't the right guy. You can be great at 8 things, but 9 and 10 are going to come around, and you just have to accept the fact that you can't be everything to everybody as much as you want to be. And you got to be graceful about that too, because if you can't handle that, it's going to affect the way I've been around people who don't share well with others, and that never works out, in the long run, because, again, it's team. And if, maybe you're not the best at what you do, it's all right. Doesn't matter. You can be the best at what you do and who you are. When I had a moment, I got a little bit bored with the situation, as 20-year-olds would do, and had a chance to record music. And I had a rock band, and we had some hits right out of the park. And that was what cost me my place in line in Los Angeles. But I didn't care anymore about that. We moved to Nashville. I was intrigued by being a lead singer and guitar player in a rock band at the end of the 80s, long hair and all that kind of stuff. And our band was really good. It was called Giant, and it was just one of those things. I was playing in a rehearsal band with studio players just for the heck of it, Mm-hmm. And then we went and recorded. We had 2 great singers who were big hit songwriters, and we cut some demos and figured that we'd get a little recording contract. Nobody was interested in it, and so one of the guys that was in that band, Alan Pasquan, and I just kept writing songs. Loved hanging out with each other musically, and we were in the studios a lot together. One thing led to the next. We get signed. We're on A&M Records, and we release a record. It was kind of cool. And so the idea was that, maybe, another career in music, maybe this is going to happen. Uh-huh. Then the 90s happened. I remember, I saw Even Flow video by Pearl Jam. I thought, well, that looks like the future, and I can't do that. Nirvana and all that stuff. It's just, that wasn't what I did. I just figured, okay. So I had to make a decision. We were living in Nashville, and it was like, okay, either I pick up in Nashville, learn how to play country music, which I had no inkling of how to do, even though I grew up here, and or move back to the West Coast. And we just didn't want to do that. So because I had some, let's just say some credibility because of the records of the previous decade, that was my in. Nashville was changing, and some of these producers in Nashville, I would say, look, I don't know how to play country music. I knew that. I was horrible at it, because I never listened to it. And there were producers. There's a guy named James Stroud who was just ripping it then. And he basically told me, he said, it doesn't matter. He said, what I want you to do what you do that 80s stuff, and if we need country elements around it, that's that. He said, I'll take care of that, but I need that sauce, right? Do what you do. Well, I can do that. And in the process, over the next 7 or 8 years, I got to play on so many records. Of course, I was used to being in the studio, and the same values. It's just a different kind of genre. You learn how to fit and get along with this in this situation, and inevitably stuff rubs off, and you kind of learn. I learned my version of country guitar playing. I used to play a ton with Brent Mason. It's like, I could never do what Brent did, and but I could do kind of what he did, and vice versa. He wasn't a rock guitar player like me, but of course he could do kind of what I did, and I don't mean that to limit either of us. We both had an area of expertise that was phenomenal and complementary. So it was good, but inevitably you're always looking at somebody else going, oh, how'd you do that? And you figure it out because some people, I've heard Brent do some rock stuff, and it sounded great to me. And there was a couple country things I played on that I applied kind of what I learned, what he did, but through my lens. I just play rock licks on a Telecaster, and it seemed to work. But yeah, that's how I ended up in Nashville, and it was great. I loved it, and it wasn't until about 10 years later that I was playing with Mutt Lange. I was over in England playing with him, and he told me about a girl he was just starting to date. He wanted to know what I thought about her, and I said, "What's her name?" Shania Twain. Yeah, I'm going to go to Nashville and cut a country record. I said, "You mean Def Leppard? AC/DC producers, Billy Ocean, all this stuff, you're going to go to Nashville?" He said, "I love country music." I said, "Wow." And the funny thing I love, he said, "But yeah, I'm not going to call you on it." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, you don't know anything about country music." And a day into the tracking of Shania Twain's first record, he called me. He said, "Hey, Dan, you want to," and I remember how he said, "You want to come down and have a play?" I thought he said I didn't know how to play country music. And he said, "No, you don't." But he said, "I need your wrist." The way I played rhythm, because a lot of the stuff he was doing was, still predicated on rock music, right? But Mutt, through that process, we'd worked on several records before Shania's, and he told me one day out of the blue, he said, "You really should be a producer." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, just the way you hear music." And it's true. It's helped me be a good studio player because it wasn't just about the guitar, it was about the way everything related. So, and he recognized that. He said, "I think you'd be really good at that." And he and Shania were actually the reason I got my first real major country artist. It was Faith Hill at that time. It was because they were at dinner with Faith and Tim. They just got married, and Faith was changing producers. And Shania said, "You should try Dan." And Faith was like, "Well, he plays on my records. Really, he can produce?" And I said, "Yeah, I think he'd be a great producer."
As you got into that role, and from your perspective as a producer, what are some of the things that led you to who you would choose to have on your sessions?
That was the good thing about being a session player. Again, you don't have to be an effective producer. You don't have to be a musician even. I've worked with some that are very remedial in their musical skills, but they knew how to motivate people and they knew good songs. The plus side of being a studio player is that you already know the language. You know what everybody does, the intricacies of what they do, because that's what you love, right? So casting people was a natural thing, shall I say? Because guitar players, especially, it's like, man, I know what every guitar player does, and it's thrilling to be able to call them and say, do what you do, and don't worry about doing everything because I can help on the back end. You're free to go, just be who you are. Same thing about everybody else. You learn. For me, learning when I was miscast on something, I was very, very clear-minded about not trying to do that to somebody because you put them in a no-win situation.
Right. So
you try to cast to strengths, and then you also, factor in that artists feel differently about people. So you usually ask them who they feel comfortable working with. But that was a natural transition. Being the arbiter of hit songs or being the final judge and jury on that, I didn't like that as much. I knew what hit songs were, but I also knew that it's a very subjective call. There's no one person that knows this stuff. Incidentally, when you tell people that, they don't believe you. They think you're hiding something. If you've had hits, I've never got my head around that, but I like making music. So for me, it was like, I was more interested in what songs do you want to record? Well, at first I had to be the guy who's making those decisions, and it was educational. It's not that I'm not interested in giving my opinion about a song, but I'm more interested in if an artist comes to me and says, this is a song, it's working well on the road, or I love this song, or I want to make your vision come true.
What would lead you as a producer to hire a new player?
Word of mouth. The last time that It was I remember calling Justin Niebank. Justin, I've done so many records together. Specifically, I need a guitar player that can play acoustic guitar like a guy in a rock band. You know, a little different from a session player's sensibility. Somebody that has an unmistakable kind of irreverence and attitude. And he goes, "I got the guy." Who? He said, "Guy named Chris Donegan. You know him?" "Nope. I had no idea." Found out later, Chris is Nashville, born and raised. You know, Nolensville.
Yeah, first thing that came to mind.
Oh, and I had a need because of a certain artist I was working with at this time. He's an alpha electric guitar player, and here I'm asking him to play acoustic guitar. Mm-hmm. Well, I know how that feels because I had the same thing when I was really young. There was a producer who just wanted me to play acoustic. It's like, why? It hurts my fingers, and I don't even want to do it, you know, because of that trust and because of his selflessness, his team spirit, putting himself secondary. It's like I knew I had a guy that's on the team, and it's like, I don't call the same musicians for every record for obvious reasons. I don't want them all to sound the same. Mm-hmm. But he endeared himself to me over the course of that one or two projects because he wanted to play electric guitar, and I didn't need that. And he said, "It doesn't matter. I'm gonna make you win on this thing." And he did. And so it's like you give him the keys, you know, to the kingdom at that point. It's like you're in.
So you had mentioned a couple of times like casting players for things, and I've personally always thought about it in that way a bit, where like in Nashville, in order to survive, you kind of have to be able to do just about anything. Yes. And really in session playing, like having that versatility.
Yeah.
But then from a producer perspective, there's oftentimes like, yeah, they can all do it, but who's the one that's going to be right based on the scenario? And it may not strictly just be the style. Maybe it's also the personalities in the room.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely casting something to put together a crew that's going to be able to, a team that's going to get the artist across the finish line. That's always been my opinion about it. If you almost have too much of that thing, then you get so pigeonholed into that thing that you feel kind of, you know, bummed out when you don't even get thought of for these other things, which you would love to do and are great at. Where do you fall on the barometer of that balance between having this, you know, the artistic identity, you know, someone knowing what you're really good at, but then also being available to, you know, stay busy enough that you're working every day because you can do this variety of things?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I mean, we all, the answer is we all get typecast. I mean, my go-to statement the last 5 years when I grew up, I want to be Dave Cobb. Because nobody calls me for that kind of music. They call me for a different kind of music. Well, I love what Dave does. I love Dave too. But it's like, I want to do some of that music. Well, I'm typecast. Same thing with all these players. You know, it's like, you're right. It's like a child actor. You know, you get a hit show. Great news is you got a hit show. The bad news is you got a hit show. Right. You know, because a lot of people find a hard time transitioning out. So I'll use me because I'm an easy target here. Well, I was not a country player when I was playing sessions daily here in Nashville a long time ago. And we talking about Brent Mason, you know, undisputed king of chicken picking. You know, my chicken picking is remedial, and I don't do that. I just mainly do it with a pick, so it's a fake, you know. But you know, Brent isn't available for everything at all times. He's not omniscient, pretty damn close to it, but he's not omniscient, you know. and so somebody's got to inevitably have a session someday. Well, I can't remember who the artist was, but it was next man up, you know. They had to do the session. They couldn't wait for Brent. And my version of it just happened to get on a hit song like that. And so what it did, I created a little subset. It's Brent. I call it Brentish, you know. And that was great. It served me. And that's the same thing happens for everybody. You know, take any style that you would be typecast. Inevitably, somebody's got to work that day. And it's like, well, you know what? You've been great at everything else we've done. You know what? Are you up for this? Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. Like, how do you mean? Get a little conversation. Good enough. Let's do it. And if you're open enough, you might find something else within that. I mean, so that's my experience with myself, and that's how I experience other players.
You mentioned the career and the ability of, you know, making hits, basically.
Yeah.
What's going to keep you, you know, working and getting called back. At the same time, there's an idea of not being able to replicate that same thing over and over again, that there needs to be originality to create something that's sustaining and, you know, lasting. Where do you think about balancing the, you know, the formula of a hit and the elements that are working in the moment versus the creation of something that's going to bring things into the next thing that people are going to be chasing.
Yeah. Stay current with your listening. I mean, always be aware. Be aware that if you're outside that cycle, that circle, you'll probably be in soon, if you keep plugging away. And if you're in the vortex of that, realize that everything has an expiration date. So, you have to acknowledge that the target will move because people get bored, with the same thing. Doing the same thing again and again, we all know the result, right?
Right.
But it's hard to turn that down once you get or to look away from that, because once you get in that moment where you're making hay, right? Do it again. So it's balancing that. I think it's acknowledging that, knowing that nothing is forever, and being aware of what's next on the horizon. Don't get too grounded to your ideas. I'm on the old end of the spectrum as far as music makers in Nashville. Now, I was always the young one, and now, you blink your eyes and I'm grandpa, and it's, metaphorically and literally, I am a grandpa. So you learn to listen. You learn to always be aware. For me, it means listening. When you're young, you listen to your elders. When you're an elder, you listen to the youngers. But there are young artists that also see somebody. We'll just use me. I'm the example today, that has been in this room, been here in this decade, done that. So there's value to experience, and that's usually what I find my common ground with musicians that are decades younger than me. I can fill a need for them because I was present at a time that they may be looking at and wanting to drag some of that into their experience. Mm-hmm. And they also feel the respect from this old codger that I'm looking at them and seeing them as a peers and equal, even though their experience may be much less than mine. Their relevance, because of culturally where they are, their skill set. So it can be a win-win situation. I think collaboration in music is one of the most, it's one of the most powerful forms of movement, of exploration. Seeing through, I probably got 20 years on you. Like if you and I were working, I'm curious what you're listening to, what's informing what you do, why do you record the way you do? Mm-hmm. And you could get the same thing from me. Right. The point is, can I give you a little story that's true about myself?
Absolutely.
I would say it was 7 years ago, maybe. I was feeling very much my age in the music business. You tend to get crotchety a little bit because, when you're fearful, what's the first thing you do? You get pissed at people, right? Mm-hmm. Don't question me. Not a good way to behave. But if you're honest with yourself, and I was really honest with my wife, I just said, it feels like what it must feel like to be a major league baseball player. Like when you're in your early 20s, the pitches, they're throwing upper 90s. Well, you're just used to that. When you're 38, those pitches seem faster for some reason because your reflexes are slowing down. All the pitches were coming in faster. And it was like stuff that I would normally hit and be able to respond to. It was unrecognizable to me. Technology was taking yet another turn. Everybody's got their laptops now, and I'm just hanging on for dear life. It was at that time in my career, I got asked to have a meeting at my house by a young producer and an artist who had some hits before, was up on the the upward trajectory, named Thomas Redd. The producer that he was going to work with was Jesse Frazier. Do you know Jesse?
Yeah.
And they came over to my house, and I said, why do you want me? Got Jesse Frazier here. And they just basically intimated, well, no, we want Jesse because what he does is exceptional. But we just want that, whatever that area, whatever is your strong suit, we just want you to be there. No real job description. It was like they wanted that sensibility. And the more I got into it, I started understanding what they wanted. They wanted those years that I had accrued from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they wanted that experience to be mashed with what they were doing specifically. Renewed my whole career, gave me a whole new outlook on everything. And it took off the heat of having to be let's just call it the guy, right? I had my the guy period for a good long time. And you just realize you can't demand that, because the world moves on. Sometimes I'm still the guy. Every once in a while, I just want that. Well, then I'm the guy again. But on a lot of situations, I have found a great source of fuel for me, growth, by being the second guy. It's just a way of looking at the world, but that came through my biggest mentor, which would be my wife, I mean, we've been together since we were teenagers. And she sees straight. She's also not afraid to call my bullshit, which is great. You got to have people like that in your life. Right. But that was a great thing. And that encompasses, again, it's the same thing. We keep coming back to this, whether you're a young kid coming and want to play sessions or you're an old geezer, still having a career in music. All these things are still viable. It's just that but you also have to grow with them and realize nothing's static. You can't sit there and say, well, this is comfortable. It's going to be like this in 5 years from now. It's not, Right. Technology humbles us all too. I mean, I don't know if you've hit that point.
Yeah, there's a few pieces of software, Melodyne being one example.
Yeah.
So I got really good really early at doing that, because that's most of when I first moved to town, what I could get hired doing for people was editing.
You are great at it too.
But then a new version of Melodyne came out, and of course, I download the update and open it up, and I'm like, but they changed everything, and it slowed me down to like half as fast as I was. And then for a period of time, I was like, well, I'm just going to keep using what I have. But I missed all these features that were starting to get added. So I basically skipped one version, and then finally I was like, okay, look. At this point, I've felt a similar way where, like, I moved to town when I was 19. Yeah. I felt I was like always the young kid that was finding his way into the room and stuff, and now I'm getting towards that. Like, now I'm the older person in the room thing. And had to decide, like, look, you just got to take some time and, and learn it. It might slow you down for a minute, but it's going to keep you present for the rest of, the time moving forward. So in that spirit of curiosity, you were led towards putting together a solo album finally.
Yeah. Well, the question arose. Two friends. I mean, they were the only ones, but the consistent friends were Tom Bukovac and Mike Reed, songwriter. But at different times, conversations, it was just, Tom was recording his first solo record, I believe. This is years ago. And he said, just passing, why don't you do something? And I never really even considered it. I mean, not at my age. It wasn't first on the list. And to be honest, I didn't play every day. For years I hadn't played every day. So a little atrophy in the technique, and so I seemed to have an excuse. But there was something that kind of kept gnawing at me, and it was just an obvious thing. And one day, just out of nowhere, I just thought, I'll just write a song. Just dip one toe in the water. Got a couple iterations of a drum loop and started just jamming in my studio. I hadn't done it. Nobody's going to judge it because nobody heard it. And over the course of a day, a song kind of emerged, and I just started recording a demo of it. It was pleasurable. I liked it. Listened to it on my phone later in the day. I thought, that could be something. It's something. Gave me license to do it. Another day. Same thing happened. Over the course of a month or so, I had 10 songs.
Wow.
And I started listening to the demos. They were pretty good. My playing was starting to emerge because I was playing, more. The way it ties in what we're talking about, it's like, the job of music is not necessarily the beauty of music. It's you take for granted that you're, like for me, that you could be around the guitars, you'd be around musicians, and you make a living. I noticed that what I would gravitate towards when I would be by myself at the gym or just driving, what did I like in music? And it didn't necessarily coincide or correlate with what I was working on in the studio. Well, that makes sense because, I grew up with a different kind of musical taste in my comfort food. We all go back to those high school years, right?
Right.
And I realized that I'd written songs that I was writing songs that were more of a nod to that. It's not the past for the sake of the past. It was how I emerged as a musician. What lit a fire in me, and that fire is always there, And so that curiosity, it just, all of a sudden, along with getting encouraged, you should just do this, put it out. What I've gotten out of it, which is interesting, you remember I was talking a little bit ago about how I got, extra lives in the video game, so to speak, when I started collaborating as a producer. Mm-hmm. A whole new world opened up to me. And this is just another version of that. The new world was my foundation. I got into music because I loved playing the guitar. I never quit loving playing the guitar. I just fell out of practice, and it wasn't part of my daily operation. It wasn't what was required out of me. I played on almost every record I ever produced, but in more as support. I was never the artist. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you realize that we all have something to say. You can hide behind other artists, and in my case, you have hits and success, whatever. When somebody says, "Well, what do you have to say?" It's like all of a sudden your throat tightens up, because all of a sudden it's down to you again. The question is, do I mean it? Is that what I mean to say? Mm-hmm. Very pertinent question at my point in my life. I ended up making a record, pulling musicians in to play on it. It's a pretty sparse record for me. I usually put too much shit on everything. That's part of my MO. This I wanted to keep it very stripped, and I did. I actually did pretty well at keeping to that. There's some moments, I heard a wonderful string arranger, Chris Wilkinson, did some great charts on a couple of records. So it's got a little bit of everything, but the question was answered at the end of the day. Is it perfect? No. When I listen to other people, I'm not demanding perfection. As a matter of fact, perfection can get a little passé if you think about it. You want to hear something that moves you.
Yeah.
So the question I just decided was, does this thing that I'm doing move me? Is this what I meant to say? Is it perfect? Not is it timeless? All these things you can't determine that. Is it what I meant to say? And the answer was yes. And at some point you have to let go. With the idea, well, if somebody likes it, you can do it again. But if you're so worried, in my case, I don't want anybody. I've never wanted anybody to see what I've always thought about myself, that I think I've got everybody fooled. I know it's in my process. I've never been confident about anything. As a matter of fact, I deal a lot with a lot of insecurity. Nobody's interested in that. They want results. So you don't lead with that. I don't tell people that I'm insecure when they hire me to do anything. Mm-hmm. They got to think that I have the answers. So I give them experience, and I do have some answers, but I don't have all. When I think about when I was a kid, a teenager, the wonderment, the insecurity of it all, where do I fit in? All of that led to this insatiable urge to discover. And what's better than that? It's the journey. It's not where you land. As a matter of fact, you could argue where I've landed is great on some levels, but wasn't great on a musical level for me, because I cut out myself, but I never thought, do I have something to add to the conversation? I don't need to be a star, mm-hmm. but do I have something to say? And I did. And so that's why this record was coming out. And I also realized that I just love melody. And my favorite guitar players, they all, when I look back at what I loved when I was a kid, it was guys who could rip, but they played melodies with such intention. And so you're listening to a piece of music, a composition, not just an excuse to show off or shred, Mm-hmm. You can shred within the course of it, but that's not the main meal. Right. And so that was another thing that I meant to say. That was my intention. Probably helps that I can't shred like I did when I was in my 20s. So you got some limitations. So limitations aren't bad. They're actually not. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's kind of the long and short of why I did this record. If they are interested in it, I promise my record company, Baked Alaska. You go to bakedalaska.com. No, Baked Alaska. That'll take you to a pot company. I found that out. Pot cookies, right? Wrong one. Although that's not bad. It's
well, they can buy some and then listen to that.
Yes, no, it's bakedalaskarecords.com.
Gotcha.
That's it. That very different
destination.
Yes, and
some people might want to try both.
Try both. Yeah, try both. Maybe you'll like the record. Tom Bukovec's records are on there. He just, he's got his first one, Plexi Soul, which is fantastic. And then he did one with Guthrie Trapp. I don't know what it's called, but it's a great record. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's the record that both those records were what inspired me to.
In the process of doing that, and just in general, you mentioned like insecurity, like throughout career, which would be something that would likely surprise a lot of people with someone that has had such a amazing career and incredible amount of success and stuff. Yeah. But also you mentioned the insecurity that we have as a kid being younger that is more based around uncertainty and wonder in the insecurity.
Yeah.
As you get older, you tell me, but it feels like that insecurity turns into a little bit more of, I've had enough experience now, I should feel confident in all of this and feel like I have the answers. Is that something that you recognized in the process of making the album, like the difference between those things along the way?
The record was like a giant therapy session for myself. It brought all this out to where you could see every little aspect of it. But now I've dealt with it my whole life. It's kept me on the quest to be better. So but you just get used to that. Everybody that I know that really does well has a certain modicum of insecurity, because the more you know, the more that you don't know, right? You realize that you don't know.
Right.
And the older you get, I mean, it just keeps exponentially expanding. You know, all the spiritual analogies to this, you know, whether it's Christianity, you know, in Islam, Buddhism, you know, come to the same thing. It's the letting go. It's survived all these thousands of years because they're onto something. That holds true in music. There's a certain surrender that you experience. You know, this is killing the end of the story for all you younger people, you know, but it's true. You get to a certain place where you have no choice but to surrender. And in that surrender, it's like with Jesse Frazier, Thomas Rhett, I surrendered an aspect of myself, saying it's no longer about me, truly no longer about me. And what did I get? I mean, I got new life. The same thing on the guitar. It's like, you know, I look at Instagram. That's my only thing that I look at. But I mean, I watch some of these younger guitar players, and you know, they play better than me when they were 5 years old. You know, I mean, technically they can. You know, because that's the way evolution. You know, the music is just evolving. You know, and I did the same thing to my predecessors. You know, I mean, so it's the law of the jungle. You know. Yeah. So you got to surrender even to that. I can't be that. Or if I spend all my time trying to be like that, I'd waste a lot of time, right? You know, be who you are. Surrender to who you are, and that's enough.
I'll tell you what. I mean, you're a very humble man, but people in our industry are incredibly intrigued to hear what you have to say on an instrument, on a solo project. I mean, you know, your career, the records you've made, the impact that you've had from start to finish, start to now, not finish, from start to now, is incredible. And you know, you're someone that I don't know anyone that doesn't, you know, wouldn't look up to. And I'm a little curious about, from your perspective, you mentioned that when you're doing that solo project, you're recognizing, you know, like there is something to say. Like for you, like what is that? Is it like an internal thing that you allow the instrument to speak for you, or is there an intention behind it that you don't demand, but you hope that the listener will? Yeah,
it's my take on playing a melody. You know, it's like I have a kind of a muscle memory towards the way, or not just muscle memory in my hands, but also the way that I love hearing melodies played by guitarists. It's informed me. And so when I have to add to the conversation, I mean, I had to have some vehicles. So I wrote some songs, and all of them, you know, if you're my age, you can piece where this stuff is coming from. It's, you know, hopefully it's not derivative. None of us are self-made, right? We build on the backs of others musically. Well, I said on the credits of the record, it's coming out in vinyl too, which is kind of cool to see something in vinyl. Oh, nice. But I said it's a love letter to that time in my life. It's not a retrospective of my whole life. As a matter of fact, when people heard me play a lot of records as a studio musician, it was the 80s. This is not an 80s shred record. This is one specific time, but has informed me over my lifetime, because those early records, you could ask each other what records informed you emotionally, and see that it transcends even what it was, right? Right. Something moved me. Well, then, so in answer to your question, I was obsessed with that at one time, and made a living because I did that. You know, I think if I'm really honest, a little bit of ego. It's like, well, I'd like people still think I can play, you know, that, I mean, there's some of that. We all have that. But I think on a deeper level, it's the love of music, you know?
So what was the process like making it? You said it started with demos in your studio where you were just kind of jamming and coming up with ideas that turned into, you know, a group of songs. And then where did it go from there?
I had an idea of just doing demos, you know, we're going to make it better. And they were very concise. I mean, I'm a producer, so I mean, it's, you know, it's easy to, you know, make songs that have the shape, everything that I want it to feel. And I play some solos, and yeah, it sounds pretty good. I'm going to replace it, you know. So that's easy. So you're there's no pressure, right? Because it's just a demo. I called two of my friends, great drummer Jerry Rowe and Mark Hill on bass. And I said, you guys got a couple days, just cut some tracks. They were well into it. And they understood kind of musically what I was going for, sonically, stylistically, and they devoured the demo. So they came in knowing the songs. I originally meant to hire a bunch of my friends. I wanted a big collaborative event, but they moved through it so fast. We got through with the whole record in 2 days. I was going to bring in just a little bit of keyboard here and there. Going to have strings on 2 songs, and I need a little percussion. So I asked Eric Darkin, would he play on it? And he said yes. And in this case, I had some temp ideas, but I've also worked with them enough, and I just send them the tracks. Gordon Mote and I went to a studio, great keyboard player, and he ripped through 5 songs like in a couple hours. He just knew it, and he's that kind of musician. So the whole idea is, as I'm practicing and making this record, I kept thinking, okay, I'm going to get down, go to the serious job of playing these guitars. Let's get real about this. So I started doing that, and I realized it didn't sound like the record anymore. And I was like, what? Because my guitar playing was getting better too, because I was playing all the time. On the original recording, I didn't use a bunch of different guitars. I used basically one amplifier because I was just writing music. What I didn't know is that because I wasn't trying, I was expressing these songs like they were supposed to be expressed. It was the initial creative moment. Mm-hmm. And so, some of it had to be replaced because some of it just flat out didn't hit the mark. It sucked in my estimation. But the majority of it, I realized that as I built this thing, that was what the record was. And it took me a minute to get used to it. When I started playing it, there was something, yes, it was better, maybe a little bit flashier here or there, maybe it sounded a little bit better, but it didn't have the essence. And I've been producer long enough to recognize that. So thank God, And there are imperfections on this record. They're not blatant mistakes. I mean, it's not like that, but it's not what like. If I played it now, I don't know that it's better. I'd play it better, but it's like when you're a producer, when you hear somebody sing on a tracking date, sometimes you never get back that initial vibe.
Right.
A lot of the record was the early, just my impressions,
Wow.
Yeah.
And it feels like the way that you're describing that is also the way that the innocent young musician would feel.
Yeah.
That hasn't been impacted yet by the transaction and, the commerce and the
bingo,
the industry and stuff.
Not the ego either.
And that the idea that the demos became the record in a lot of the cases is exactly that. Because the thing that was the right thing was the thing that wasn't influenced by the expectation of 100%. Perfection.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. When I never listened to any other people's music with that in mind. I just want to hear I want to hear the heart and soul.
Right.
I don't care if it's out of tune. Well, why? My question to myself was one day was like, why? If that's how I listen, that's how I love music, right? Why can't I apply that to myself? And I had no good answer. Yeah, I really didn't. I mean, I know the answer was because I don't want anybody to see the underbelly, but that wasn't a good enough answer. And so, again, you learn stuff at different points of your career from angles. I mean, you can know this all your life and not know it for yourself. So that was my discovery, and I absolutely love it because of that.
So tell us again where people can find the record.
BakedAlaskaRecords.com. That's the big thing. BakedAlaskaRecords.com.
Make sure you add the records.
Yeah. I didn't try the other one.
Or go to the other one.
Maybe that'll help the listening experience.
Well, dude, I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that very
man.
much.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.